My sister and her husband wanted me to babysit their kids so they would enjoy their 1 month vacation. My older sister has always had a talent for turning her responsibilities into everyone else's problem. Growing up, she was the type who could spill a glass of juice and somehow convince our parents that I should clean it because I was better at wiping things down. If she forgot a birthday gift, I was expected to share mine. If she missed a deadline, someone else was supposed to rescue her. So when she married and had 2 kids, I wasn't surprised that nothing changed. The only difference was that now there were 4 people expecting me to solve their problems instead of just one. I love my niece and nephew. They're sweet kids who didn't ask for any of this. Whenever I visited, I brought little presents, played games with them, and even babysat on occasion if there was an emergency. But there's a huge difference between helping family and becoming unpaid full-time childcare. Apparently, my sister and her husband didn't understand that distinction. One Saturday afternoon, they invited me over for what they called a small family lunch. Everything seemed normal at first. We ate, chatted, and laughed while the kids chased each other around the living room. Then my brother-in-law cleared his throat with a kind of smile that immediately made me suspicious. "So," he said, "we have some exciting news." Sister clapped her hands dramatically. "We're finally taking our dream vacation." I smiled politely. "That sounds fun. Where are you going?" "Europe," she announced proudly. "A whole month. We've been planning it forever." "A month?" I asked. 32 days, she corrected with a grin. I congratulated them and assumed that was the end of the conversation. It wasn't. She leaned closer. "And you're going to help make it possible." Room suddenly felt very quiet. "What do you mean?" Her smile never faded. "You'll stay at our house and watch the kids while we're gone." "Would you be willing?" Not could you help, she had already decided. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. My brother-in-law slid a printed schedule across the table. It listed school pickups, meal plans, bedtime routines, extracurricular activities, and even reminders about which stuffed animal each child preferred at night. There were 32 pages. One for every single day they planned to disappear. I stared at it. "You already made a schedule." "Of course," my sister said. "Planning ahead is important. For me, yes, we knew you'd do it." I pushed the packet back across the table. The smiles vanished instantly. My sister blinked. No, I'm not taking over your parental responsibilities for an entire month." She looked genuinely offended. "But you work from home. That doesn't mean I'm free. You don't have children. Also doesn't mean I'm free." Brother-in-law jumped in. "It's not like you have anything tying you down." I had deadlines, clients, meetings, hobbies, friends, and my own life. But apparently because I was a woman without kids, they considered my calendar permanently available. My sister sighed dramatically. "I just thought family helps family." "I do help family," I replied. "A weekend, sure, an emergency, absolutely. 32 days while you vacation across Europe, no." She crossed her arms. "You're punishing our children." I nearly laughed again. "Your children." The conversation became increasingly ridiculous. She insisted I was the obvious choice. I suggested hiring a nanny. She rejected the idea because it would cost too much. I suggested shortening the trip. She said she deserved the full month. I suggested bringing the kids along. She claimed they would ruin the experience. That sentence hung in the air. She openly admitted she wanted a child-free vacation. By making me live as a full-time parent instead. When I still refused, she changed tactics. "You know," she said quietly, "Mom always said you were the selfish one." Revision of history considering I'd spent years helping everyone around me. I stood up to leave. "I hope you enjoy your vacation if you find childcare. But it won't be me." As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed then again and again. By the time I got home, I had 12 missed calls and 19 text messages from relatives asking why I was abandoning my sister. Someone had clearly started making calls before I even reached my driveway. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to a social media post from my sister that didn't mention my name directly, but complained about family members who refuse to support hardworking parents because they only think about themselves. The comments were exactly what she wanted. People praised her sacrifices. People criticized the mysterious relative who wouldn't step up. She even liked comments calling that person cold-hearted. I considered ignoring it, then I received another surprise. A delivery truck pulled into my driveway. The driver stepped out carrying several large suitcases. He smiled politely and asked, "Where would you like these?" "The pickup instructions say the children will be arriving next weekend." I froze. Because somehow, despite my repeated refusal, my sister had already arranged to drop off both kids and all their belongings at my house as if my answer had never mattered. I looked at the driver and said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." He checked his paperwork again and frowned. "The customer said someone would be here to receive the luggage." "Here," I replied, "but I never agreed to any of this." He apologized, loaded the suitcases back onto the truck, and drove away. Not even 10 minutes later, my phone started ringing. My sister. I answered on the third call. "Why did you send the luggage back?" she demanded before I could say hello. "I'm not watching your children. You embarrassed us." "No, you embarrassed yourself by making plans without my permission." She huffed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "You're acting impossible. You're acting entitled." She hung up. I thought that would finally settle it. Instead, she doubled down. Within hours, our mother called to tell me that I should be the bigger person. Then an aunt texted that my sister and her husband needed a break. A cousin even suggested I should feel honored that they trusted me with the kids. Funny enough, none of those relatives volunteered to babysit for a month. I politely asked each one the same question. "If you think it's such a wonderful idea, why don't you do it?" The excuses arrived faster than I could read them. "I'm too busy." "My house is too small." "My schedule is packed." "I have plans." Exactly. Apparently everyone's time had value except mine. A few days later, my sister invited the entire family over for dinner. I only went because our parents insisted it would clear the air. Did the opposite. Dessert had barely been served when my brother-in-law stood up holding 2 envelopes. "Wanted everyone to see what we've been saving for," he announced proudly. Inside were glossy printouts of luxury hotels, beach resorts, and first-class flight upgrades. He passed them around while describing private tour and expensive restaurants. Everyone admired the itinerary. Then he smiled at me. "Thanks to my sister-in-law helping with the kids, we can finally enjoy all of this stress-free." Every head at the table turned toward me. I slowly set down my fork. "Not helping with the kids." Silence. My sister laughed nervously. "She's joking." Not. Her smile disappeared. "We already booked everything." "Was your decision?" "Seriously going to ruin our vacation." "Declining to become your unpaid nanny." She looked around the table as though expecting someone to rescue her. Instead, my father asked a simple question. "Did she ever actually agree?" My sister hesitated. "Well, not exactly." My father nodded. "Then you shouldn't have assumed." For a brief moment, I thought the conversation was over. Then my brother-in-law muttered, "Some people only care about themselves." I couldn't help smiling. That's interesting coming from someone asking another adult to put her entire life on hold for 32 days so he can sip drinks on a beach. A couple of relatives hid their laughter behind napkins. My sister was furious. She accused me of humiliating them in front of everyone. I reminded her that she was the one who announced a childcare arrangement that didn't exist. The dinner ended awkwardly. Over the next week, the pressure campaign intensified. She sent me calendars with the vacation dates highlighted. She emailed me meal plans. She mailed emergency contact forms. She even included spare house keys with a sticky note that read, "You'll need these." I mailed the keys right back. Then came the biggest surprise of all. 3 days before their scheduled departure, I opened my front door and found my niece and nephew standing there with backpacks. Behind them were my sister and her husband unloading luggage from their SUV. She smiled brightly. "We figured once the kids were here, you wouldn't say no." I stepped outside before the children could hear the conversation. "What are you doing?" "Dropping them off." "I told you no." Already excited. "That's unfortunate because they're leaving with you." Brother-in-law folded his arms. "Flight leaves tomorrow morning." "Then I suggest you hurry and make other arrangements." For nearly 15 minutes they argued in my driveway. The neighbors began peeking through windows. The kids looked confused. I knelt down and gently told them, "Your parents are taking you home today. Everything's okay." Finally, realizing I wasn't going to give in, my sister slammed her car door so hard it echoed down the street. As they drove away, she shouted through the open window, "Don't expect us to ever help you again." I waved politely. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and enjoyed the quiet. For the first time all week, my phone stayed silent. I honestly believed the drama was finished. The next morning, I opened social media and nearly dropped my mug. My sister had posted a long emotional message claiming that a certain family member had left 2 innocent children heartbroken by refusing to care for them during a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The story conveniently left out every detail that made her look unreasonable. Within minutes, strangers were calling me selfish. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years started messaging to ask what had happened. And buried among hundreds of comments was one sentence from my sister that caught my attention immediately. Some people don't deserve to be part of this family. She thought public pressure would finally force me to give in. She had no idea that someone much closer to home was about to expose the truth, and they had receipts. The person who changed everything wasn't a lawyer, a detective, or some dramatic stranger. It was my cousin. She called me that evening and said, "I saw your sister's post. Before you panic, I think you should know she's leaving out a lot." Apparently, during the family dinner, my cousin had overheard my sister bragging to another relative that she had already backed me into a corner. According to her, once the kids were standing on my doorstep with their luggage, I'd be too embarrassed to refuse. She actually laughed about it, my cousin told me. She said you always end up cleaning up everyone else's mess. That was enough for me. I wasn't interested in starting an online fight, but I also wasn't going to let a false story spread unchecked. So I wrote one calm, respectful post. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't call anyone names. I simply explained that I had been asked to provide free, full-time childcare for over a month, that I had declined multiple times, and that the children had still been brought to my house without my consent. Then I added one sentence. If someone ignores your answer until they hear the one they want, that isn't a misunderstanding. It's disrespect. I posted it and put my phone away. When I checked it a few hours later, the response was completely different from what my sister expected. People began asking reasonable questions. Why didn't they hire a babysitter? Why book a month-long vacation before confirming childcare? Why pressure someone after they already said no? My sister's original post suddenly wasn't getting the sympathy she had counted on. Then my aunt called, not to scold me, to apologize. She admitted my sister had only told everyone that I had changed my mind at the last minute. She never mentioned that I had refused from the beginning. One by one, relatives started reaching out after realizing they had only heard one side of the story. Some stayed neutral, some quietly admitted I was right. And one uncle said something that made me laugh. If they can afford luxury hotels for 32 days, they can afford childcare. Exactly. Meanwhile, my sister and her husband were scrambling. Their vacation departure was only hours away, and they still had no one willing to watch the kids for an entire month. Several relatives they contacted gave them the same answer I had. No, because they disliked the children, but because it was an enormous responsibility to expect someone to take on with almost no notice and no discussion. Then came the phone call I never expected. It was my brother-in-law. His voice was unusually polite. "We've been thinking," he began, "and maybe we could pay you." I nearly smiled. There was a long pause. Finally, he named a figure that wouldn't have covered even a week of professional childcare, let alone an entire month. I thanked him for the offer and declined. He immediately became irritated. "It's about money." "No," I replied. "It's about respect. Payment doesn't erase the fact that you treated my time as something you could claim without asking." He hung up. 2 days later, photos started appearing online, not from Europe. From a beach resort only a few hours away. Apparently, they had canceled the month-long international trip and replaced it with a short local getaway where they could bring the children along. Judging by the pictures, everyone looked perfectly happy. The kids were building sandcastles. My sister was smiling for the camera. My brother-in-law was grilling food near the shore. It looked like they had managed just fine after all. I stared at the photos and shook my head. All that drama, all those accusations. All the pressure on me. And in the end, the solution had been obvious the entire time. Plan a vacation that matched the responsibilities they already had as parents. A week after they returned, my sister showed up unexpectedly at my door. For a brief moment, I thought she might finally apologize. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, "You know, if you had just agreed in the first place, none of this would have happened." I looked at her calmly and answered, "No. If you had respected my answer in the first place, none of this would have happened." She opened her mouth to argue, then realized there was nothing left to say. She turned around and walked back to her car without another word. As I closed my front door, I realized something important. Saying no hadn't damaged our relationship. It had simply revealed the parts of it that had been broken all along. And from that day forward, every time someone tried to volunteer my time, my energy, or my home without asking me first, my answer came quickly, politely, and without guilt. "No, thank you." Because boundaries aren't cruel. Assuming someone else will put their entire life on hold for your convenience is.